All right, hello everyone, and welcome to this MakeCode from Microbit beta deep dive. We're supposed to do some JavaScript today, but my assistant is sleeping. All right, so what are we going to be today? We're going to be talking about the GitHub integration. We already covered that in the first episode, mostly looking at student angle, but today we're going to look at upgrades and improvements we've made in the GitHub integration for extension writers. GitHub is this website that many companies use and many developers use to host their code. It's a friendly website on top of Git, which is a very popular source control system. And yeah, there's a lot of projects on there. You can see the number above my head. There's 100 million repositories, which are projects and some pretty big ones. So we're going to be using that to store our code from MakeCode, and also in MakeCode, all the extensions, the third-party blocks and things like that are hosted as repositories in GitHub. So the new integration makes it easier to author because you can write and test and deploy your extension straight from the editor. You don't have to go install anything else. All right. So I'm just going to jump into the makecode.microbit.org/beta, and this is the upcoming summer 2020 release of Microbit. So if you see this movie in the future me, this is actually the present. But yeah, so that's the future, and we'll have this extension support. So I'm going to create an extension in this video. And this extension is going to, I had this nifty idea. It's just going to give me an indexing of the LEDs via number. It's just going to do a little math there to simplify that. So I'm just going to do LED. I'm going to call it LED matrix strip, or maybe Microbit screen as a line. All right, some kind of good name here. And I'm just going to create my project. As usual, I can do my coding. Now, if you're building an extension, most likely you don't want to use blocks because we are going to write everything in JavaScript. So when you're writing extensions, go ahead in the Explorer and then delete the blocks file so you don't accidentally go there and mess up your code. All right, so you've got your project here. It's not specifically using radio, but I'll keep it. I'm going to start by creating a GitHub repository. So if you click here at the button, the GitHub button, you'll go through the flow of creating a new repo, a nifty block to address LEDs as a line. All right. We're going to make it public and click go ahead. So it looks like my token wasn't accepted. And we're still in the beta. So I think I'm going to sign out and I'm going to sign in again. And then I'm going to go through the sign in flow again. All right, let's do that. Okay, so it signed in, came back. So I was already signed in GitHub, and now I can create my project. And the first time you do that, it does add quite a bit of files to your repo. So it takes a little bit of time. Just have to be patient there. All right. And you know you've got a GitHub repo because now you've got a check mark or an icon here. In fact, the save button is gone. All right, so there's quite a bit of extensions out there, so you can look at examples. But typically, what you'll want to do is create a website, a namespace for your extension. I'm going to call it. What did I name this extension? I'm going to call it Screen Magic. That's going to be the namespace. And then typically a block is going to be an exported function in TypeScript, JavaScript. So I'm going to call that line index, and it's going to take typical coordinates of the LED. Let me go and collapse this. All right, and it's going to return a number. All right, so the purpose of this is to map x, y coordinates into a number. No, actually, it's the inverse. I'm going to say index. I'm going to call this plot. At. I'm going to take a number, and it's going to do the math for me to plot at the right location. So in this case, x is going to be, so x is the rows, so we're going to divide index by 5. Now this is going to give us a floating point number, and we're just going to round that. Right. So we're going to round x divided by 5, and then y is going to be index minus x times 5. I want to round that too. Or actually, we could just round the remainder of index divided by 5. All right, you want to round it because your coordinate. Hi, Dylan. What's your question? Can you picture in Mixer? Yeah, I'm using OBS like I think a lot of streamers do. Okay, so this is just a fun one, and then you can do plot x and y. All right, now in order to test this, what we're going to do is going to add a little test here, and we're just going to go and test that all of these work, and probably add a pause here. All right, let's see if that works. Kind of very messed up. So I definitely have problems here. So this should have been, yeah, it's early morning. Let's do more coffee. Let's round this index first. Make sure we got a clean number here. Gonna do a quick one here. All right, so we're gonna, instead of rounding, I'm gonna floor it. And the annoying thing is that we're going the other way around. So I want to kind of go row first. I'm going to swap those. Let's see if that helps. All right, so we've got a nice little function that instead of counting x, y, let's just count by an index. Now I'm going to turn that into an extension, and this works. And again, if you're in GitHub, whenever you make a change, go ahead and review your change and push them. If you add a comment, extra points. All right, so we're going to make that a block. So in the past, you would say address LEDs row by linearly row first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is a screen magic block. That's like a unique identifier. And now the syntax for this thing is going to be LED plot, or just plot at index. And extra points, I'm going to say index min is 0, index max is 25, because that's going to make a nicer experience. Now, I've got a block here, and unfortunately, let me go ahead and commit this. So GitHub commit. And you can do all these commits because you've got a full history here. When you do that, if you go to GitHub and you click on commits, you also have a full history of what you've done, which is very nice. All right, so this would have been tricky to test because there's no more blocks files in your project, and you really want to test as if you were the user. So what we've added in the GitHub view for extension writers is a special support to open this project in test mode. So I'm going to click on that. So if you go to the GitHub section, you'll see the extension zone. There's a few things for you, but one that's interesting is test extension. And if I click on that, it'll open a new tab, and that tab will reference my local copy of the repository. So I can see that I messed up my block because this should have been a hole to put a number and it's not. So I need to fix that. And you can see here that I've got my tabs here. So I've got the test tab and my GitHub repo tab. So I can go back to main here and figure out that, yeah, I kind of forget, put the $sign here. All right. And I can just simply come back here. It's going to reload the project. And now I can see that my block is fixed. And I can nicely now, add a pause here. And probably some kind of for loop. There we go. Oh, yeah. Yep. So I'm testing my extension and it looks like it's working great. There's still some work to be done here, the color, the weight, and things like that. But as far as getting the extension into and testing it, this is the new flow. So you have two tabs, and one tab you've opened with the test extension. So I've made a change again. I can go ahead and push that. All right. The other thing we've added for extension writers is this button to add a license. So if the default template doesn't add a license, but if you want to be an approved extension in MakeCode, you need to have a license. It has to be MIT. So if you click on that, it will take you to a page in GitHub that lets you pick the license for your project. So you're welcome to pick whatever project you want, whatever license you want. I'm going to pick MIT here, and I'm going to click review and submit. Scroll down all the way and just commit it straight into the master branch. And once I do that, I can close this window. And if I come back to MakeCode, you'll see that it's still there, but there's something that tells me that we need to pull changes. And that means that there are changes in GitHub that we haven't downloaded in the browser. I'm going to go ahead and click that. And now the add license is gone. You have a license, you're good to go. The other button here is Save for Offline. And what this button does is it saves your extension as a hex file. And you can then ship that hex file to someone, and then you can import it into the editor. So if you're using the offline editor of MakeCode, you can use that. All right, so this is we're not done quite done yet. The next thing is going to be to create a release, and you want to create a release for extensions because MakeCode will have the users link to the latest release of your repository. And this is very important because that means you can make changes to master without impacting your users. As soon as you create a release, then your users will add the project to their, will add your extension to their project, will start using that release. Also important to know, we don't automatically update releases right now. So they will also have, you will not break previous releases by creating a new release. All right, so to do that, what you want to do is create release. And you'll see that there's 3 options here. And this is using Semver. If you want to know more about that, there's a link here that explains the versioning. There's 3 types of version increment you want to do. There is a patch, which means you basically fixed a bug that is invisible. There is adding a function, optional parameter, so these changes should not break existing code. And there is a major change that means most likely an existing snippet from a customer or user might just not compile anymore, and they're going to have to make changes. I'm going to make it a patch here, so I'm going to just create release. And what this does, it creates a tag in GitHub. So if you want to see what this means in the cloud, if you go to GitHub and you click here, and you'll see here release, you'll see that there is now an official release in GitHub. And that's what our backend uses to figure out what is your release. If you ever need to delete a release, you can click on it, and there's a delete here, and you can delete it. But you will break people's code. So instead, just create a new one. Something to note, there is a little yellow arrow here. We also have actions running for you on your repo. So whenever you make a release, we actually run a full build of the MakeCode command line. And that makes sure that your code is building. Let me see if I can get an older one. So once this is done, it takes a little bit of time, but it installs the MakeCode build tools, and then it runs the build tools against your repo and makes sure everything's fine and compiling. So this is a great feature. Additional checks on your software. All right. So we've got our license, we've got a release, our extension is ready. That means if you want people to use it, they can just import it in MakeCode. One thing now you can do is update the docs. So by default, this is the template we produce for the README, and the README is really designed to be used in blocks. And this is a place you can actually write documentation for your extension. So for example, I'm going to remove that because I don't need it. If I make a change here, you can still see it in div. The README becomes a GitHub page. That means automatically for any extension you create, you're going to have a full web page that is actually hosted, and it's kind of linked to your repository. It's hosted by GitHub. It is compiled on every build. So on every commit, it's recompiled quickly. And by default, what it does, it renders this page README to HTML. So if you click on this button here, you'll see that this is my README rendered as a HTML page, and has a few things to it to help you write your documentation. First of all, it lets you write blocks, samples. So I'm going to take my test, and I'm going to make it as a usage. So here, I'm going to call it plot at, and here I'm going to create a block section. So this is how in MakeCode we generate our documentation. We have special language in the Markdown. This is a code fence region in Markdown. So this tells MakeCode, oh, you want to render this in blocks. And then we can say use the plot at block to address to render LEDs at a index location. So that's my quick documentation here. This is documentation for the user in terms of how to go and use the extension. So I can go and look at a preview here. So see that a preview. We're still tracking this bug. This should not be a gray block. We'll figure that out. And if your preview looks good, you can go to the GitHub commit, you can look at the diff. You can see I've added 15 lines here and hit commit. Again, on each commit, GitHub triggers a build of GitHub pages. And that means after a few minutes and maybe a few more with caching, it will generate a new web page for your website. Let me go and show that. So that's the website. If you don't remember what it is, you can also find it. Here it's added as the official website for the repository. So if I go here and I refresh, you'll see that it takes a little bit of time, but eventually the rendering engine renders the blocks. So you don't have to put screenshots. And also, if a French user is going to look at this, his blocks are going to be, for example, these blocks are going to be in French. So that is those are the improvements that we've added for extension writing. And just to recap, we have now a way to test an extension, and it opens a second toolbar. And you can close that toolbar and then you can reopen it, no problem. It'll just come back to whatever test you were doing before. We have a way to create a release, and release, MakeCode was always use the latest release, the highest release in server. So, and also it expects some syntax for those releases. We have automatic generation of a web page for your project in the README, and if, for example, if a student has an extension, this allows them to explain his work and get that going. Of course, we've got diffs and a lot of the GitHub goodness in here, and that covers mostly extensions. One word to say that if you're doing extensions with C++, this is you're still going to have to use the command line tools. This is really for extension that only use TypeScript. But hopefully it really helps creating these packages with additional blocks. And this is all live at makecode.microbit.org/beta. And that concludes this section on improvements in GitHub to support extensions. We will cover in the future extensions how to do custom tutorials. So there's a question in the chat whether this would be an easy way to share an extension with your students. Absolutely. So if you look at the README, let me go back to the page that we generated. There is a section called Use as an Extension that actually explains step by step how you can use that in your project. So open in MakeCode, Microbit, do a new project, click an extension, search for this, and import. So if students follow these steps, they'll be able to use one of your extensions. So if you find yourself writing a lot of code and reusing code for your classroom or for an exercise, and you want to have a more stable home where maybe somebody can help you and collaborate, definitely you can use the GitHub section. So the question is whether it can be used in GitHub Classroom. I don't know whether this can be used in GitHub Classroom. I'm not sure it is enabled. So I would expect there is a few issues, and it would not work because the sign-in flow will not work in the classroom. But by all means, send us open a bug or go to forum.makecode.com or support.microbit.org and ask a question about it, and we'll take a look at that. All right, so that concludes this episode of beta for GitHub for extension writers. So if you're selling extensions or you're building your own custom blocks, this should make your life much more easy. See you around for the next stream.